Well, another year has come and gone. You know what that means.
Free ice cream!
No, you stupid idiot. It's time for my annual look out the window. Time to look out the window. And that is why I stay indoors. During last year's top cartoon list, a running theme throughout was me bemoaning the absolute dreary state of both the entertainment industry and humanity as a whole. Unsurprisingly, things are still pretty bleak out there. Now, this year wasn't without its victories, such as the WGA successfully getting a better deal for writers, and the release of multiple animated films that were absolute game changers. And because I'm a YouTuber, I'm contractually obligated to remind you that they all have higher Rotten Tomato scores than Wish, because Rotten Tomatoes may be terrible, but it makes for good clickbait. Unfortunately, we've also seen a rapid rise in studios using AI, which risks putting artists out of work, and allowing these studios to use actors' likenesses however they like without any compensation, which will likely restart the actors' strike. On top of that, the original building that housed Cartoon Network Studios for more than 20 years shut its doors, and Cartoon Network as we know it is more or less dead. Coyote vs. Acme is still in limbo, creatives are still being screwed over by the streaming model, and that isn't even getting into the massive job losses and all-around corporate scumminess that we're already seeing in 2024. And then, there was the absolute hell of putting together this video. I actually intended on finishing this video by the end of January, but it got delayed for several reasons. For starters, during production, I came down with a bad case of lack of focus and motivation that left the video script still not finished even after a month, and just when it seemed like I was close to finishing it, the script had to get even longer. So in the original draft for the script, I wasn't going to cover Disney shows because I, like some, wanted to boycott the mouse for giving money to an apartheid state. However, I would soon encounter this thread pointing out that the BDS weren't asking for a boycott on Disney because trying to do so to a massive conglomerate that owns basically everything is nigh impossible. With the OP saying that some of these people who were making a big deal about not supporting Disney were just doing some moral grandstanding. And considering that this original script had me explicitly say that I wouldn't cover Disney cartoons because this company was evil, it made me stop and reconsider whether or not I was only doing this out of self-righteousness. So I decided that maybe talking about Disney cartoons in this video didn't necessarily make me a bad person, which meant that I had to make this video even longer in order to maintain the integrity of the list and talk about every single cartoon I watched in 2023. And it was too late to make it a top 10 since I already gathered the footage and wrote out the entries for the majority of the shows that wouldn't have made my top 10 otherwise. So I went, screw it, and decided that this video was going to be a top 20. So now we have this hour-plus long monster of a video that I spent way too much time on, considering that the last list didn't do all that well.
Why would anyone do anything a second time after they got burned so badly the first time?
Because I make very bad decisions. But you know what? None of that matters, because my New Year's resolution was to maintain a more positive attitude, because it was either that or go outside more. Which isn't really an option. So no more hopeless cynicism like in last year's list. No more doom and gloom. I'm not letting life bring me down anymore. We're going to ignore how we're all living in a capitalist hellscape for just a second and talk positively about the only good things to come out of this nightmare of a year without being a downer, even if it kills me. Like with last year's list, this ranking will consist of all of the cartoons that I watched during my free time. So if your fave isn't here, it's either because I couldn't find the time to view it, or it just didn't interest me. My sincerest apologies to all 10 of the Crapopolis stands out there. Also, because I'm not the kind of guy to waste time on things I don't think look good, this list will consist mostly of shows that I personally enjoyed. So if you are looking forward to me discussing the hate crimes that the white supremacist chinchilla committed, you're fresh out of luck. So, without further ado, here's my top 20 cartoons of 2023. My god, I'm already tired.
Audiences hate meta jokes. When will comedy writers learn?
Velma is an adult take on the Scooby-Doo franchise centering on Velma Dinkley, who sets out to solve a string of murders, as well as uncover the mystery of her mother's disappearance. When Velma was announced, I was honestly fairly optimistic. Given that it was supposed to be a coming-of-age story, I was under the impression that Velma was going to be a more grounded take on Scooby-Doo, with a tone akin to something like Daria. Then the first screenshot was released, and it showed Velma and Daphne standing over the corpse of a girl with the top of her head cut off. Huh. That was not the direction I was expecting. Regardless, I was still open to see what this reimagining of Scooby-Doo had to offer. Then the trailers came out. They weren't very good. This has to be the worst first impression that a series has ever left on me. Every second of these trailers were nothing but the show cracking obnoxious meta joke after obnoxious meta joke, reveling in how edgy it is, daring the audience to be mad at it, and it just left me rolling my eyes. They made Velma look absolutely terrible, so I didn't watch it. Let me explain. So the title of this video might be a bit of a lie. You see, I actually ended up watching a total of 19 cartoons in 2023, which is a really awkward number, and top 20 cartoons of 2023 just had a much better ring to it. And because I've been working on this script since November, and I don't have the energy to find another whole series to watch, I decided that the best course of action for getting this list to 20 entries was to share my thoughts on this one show that I actually do have some things to say about, even though I've only seen and heard bits and pieces of it. From what I gather, the issues I had with Velma's trailers are also present in the show itself, with the series constantly trying way too hard to be self-aware and edgy. It clearly wants to be something like Harley Quinn the animated series, with it having a similarly crass, irreverent tone, but it just overdoes it with the meta humor. Plus, while an R-rated, self-aware, edgy comedy makes perfect sense for a character like Harley Quinn, playing the Scooby Gang in this kind of setting feels really try-hard. Like, I know I said that I'd be cool with a more adult take on Scooby-Doo, but I didn't mean filling it to the brim with gore, drugs, and a really weird locker room scene with near-nude 16-year-olds. Like, why? Why was that there? It just comes across like it's being needlessly edgy for the sake of being needlessly edgy. That said, Velma is honestly one of the better looking adult cartoons out there. Although I'm a bit meh on the character designs as a whole, I actually do like Velma's redesign quite a bit. The backgrounds look nice, the animation's solid, the hallucination sequences are genuinely gorgeous. It's an appealing looking show overall. And that's all I can really say about Velma itself. Most everything I've seen of it wasn't very good, but I hear the show at least improves somewhat as it goes on. Who knows? Maybe if I watched it, I'd come out thinking that it wasn't all that bad. I doubt it wouldn't have been on the bottom of the list, but still, at the very least, it can't be half as obnoxious as all of the white nationalist grifters who've effectively drowned out all the sincere criticisms of Velma to rant about how woke it is and how they made Velma ugly by having her not be skinny, white, and straight, because Velma being skinny, white, and straight would somehow fix the overabundance of meta humor and the out-of-place try-hard edgelord tone. It's these kinds of reactions that generally make me feel sorry for Velma. Like, it literally did not matter whether this show was good or not. Even if Velma were a masterpiece, it still would have gotten a ton of backlash under the sheer virtue of Velma being dark-skinned. It just kind of worked out for all the neo-Nazis that actual normal people didn't like this show either. I've honestly been thinking about the backlash against this show quite a bit lately, to the point where I've genuinely been contemplating watching Velma for real once season 2's done, just so I can do a video about the sheer amount of discourse surrounding the show. No promises though, it'll have to come on a day where I particularly hate myself. As it stands though, Velma is definitely a show that exists. Now on to the cartoons I've actually watched.
Time travel!
Like last year, we have exactly one show on here that I thought was just kind of okay. Haley's on It follows Haley Banks, an ordinary, if somewhat awkward 14-year-old who has always been afraid of taking risks and trying new things. That all changes when Haley's visited by her future a mysterious time-traveling stranger who informs her that she's destined to save the world. However, in order to begin going down that path, Haley, with help from Scott, her best friend slash crush, and Beta, a miniature robot from the future, has to complete all of her goals and dreams that she's listed in her journal over the years for this totally legit mission. Haley's on It is a show that I really did try to get into. I watched the first batch of episodes when they dropped on Disney+, but by the time the second batch released, I just couldn't find a reason to justify returning to it. Apart from Haley and Scott, who are genuinely charming leads with a fun dynamic, as well as a few of the supporting characters, there just wasn't a whole lot about this series that stood out to me. Everything from the art style to the animation to the writing was perfectly okay and not much else. However, when I decided to make this video, I thought it was only fair to give the rest of the season a shot, especially considering that a fair amount of people seem to really enjoy it. So I watched the remainder of Haley's on It, hoping that would surprise me in some way, and I think my standing with the show got slightly worse as a result. On top of Haley's on It still being just consistently okay, I gradually discovered two things about this show that really weighed it down for me. First off, I think that the sci-fi elements are mostly unnecessary and only serve to overcomplicate and clutter an otherwise pretty solid premise. Despite the premise heavily involving time travel and the fate of the world supposedly hinging on Haley finishing the items on her list, Haley's on It doesn't really do a whole lot with that aspect of its premise. Beta doesn't really have much of a presence in this show, and the Chaos Bots sent from the future to apparently stop Haley only turn up every now and then and never feel like that much of a threat. In fact, there are several episodes where the time travel / sci-fi elements are pretty much absent, and the show didn't feel any different. The future scientist lady is pretty much the only sci-fi element that I feel was really necessary for this story, and even that feels kind of overcomplicated. Like, the show makes it very obvious that the future lady is either an older Haley or a future descendant, and this whole growing up to save the world thing was just a means to get her to do all of the things that she regretted not doing as a kid, meaning there's no real tension with the Chaos Bot stuff, which makes me wonder why the pretense of saving the world is even there to begin with, especially given how the majority of the episodes are low-stakes slice-of-life stories. Listen, a story being predictable isn't inherently a bad thing, especially if the journey itself is fun, but it's distracting for me personally because of how largely unremarkable I find everything else about Haley's on It to be. I mean, there is a chance that Haley's on It could pull a fast one on me, and I, as well as the majority of the people who watch this show, end up being completely wrong about the direction this story's heading. But as it stands now, I'm not holding my breath. I don't know. I just feel like this show would have been better off if it were just this straightforward slice-of-life story about a girl wanting to get out of her comfort zone and achieve her dreams without all this extraneous time travel nonsense or any pretense of the world being at stake. Then there's the whole will they or won't they thing that Haley and Scott have going on. Now don't get me wrong, I like these two together and their dynamic isn't grating, at least not yet, but their will they or won't they nonsense got really old really fast. There's also kind of a love triangle here with Scott dating this girl Christine. I say kind of because they don't really do a lot with this dynamic, and Christine ends up dumping Scott in like episode 10 anyways, so why did we even bother doing this song and dance to begin with? I mean, I'm glad they didn't drag out this love triangle and make it super angsty or whatever, but what was the point of any of this? You know, besides act as one of several obstacles to delay Haley and Scott from inevitably becoming official. Seriously, why are shows still doing this with friends of the opposite gender? Why couldn't they just stay platonic? Better yet, just have them already dating by the start of the show. Why don't kids' cartoons ever take that option? Have we learned nothing from the travesty that was Starco? Despite the gripes I have with it though, I still think that Haley's on It is a perfectly fine show, and I can understand why people would enjoy it. The leads are likable, the show can be pretty funny from time to time, and it is nice to get more Pacific Islander representation. There just isn't quite enough to this show for it to really grab me.
Drama bomb!
I've already made 2 entire videos on this damn revival, so I'm going to keep things as brief as possible here. If you want my more detailed thoughts on the new Total Drama Island, go check them out. Anyways, Total Drama Island 2023 is a revival / soft reboot of the widely beloved Canadian animated series Total Drama, this being the first proper installment of the franchise in 8 years, unless you count Total Drama Rama, the existence of which I'm still struggling to grapple with. While the Total Drama Island revival shares the same faults as previous installments, such as mediocre animation and obnoxious gross-out humor, it still very much achieves what it sets out to do, to be a total drama for the modern day. The use of modern trends and lingo doesn't feel distracting or pandering, the diversity is handled well, the tone is back to being relatively grounded, and this generation has quite easily the strongest cast of characters since the OG contestants. The main thing that holds the revival back is the 13-episode season length, which leads to several storylines feeling like they ended too soon, and developments that feel lacking in build-up. Seriously, I don't get why we can't go back to 26-episode seasons. Man, just let me spend more time with these characters. Despite this, the Total Drama revival managed to be pretty enjoyable, at least in the first season. Season 2, unfortunately, was kind of a letdown. While it started out pretty good, the season takes a serious nosedive in its second half, which is filled with a lot of bizarre, frustrating writing decisions, the most detrimental one being the choice to have this season focused almost exclusively on the painfully lame, aggressively generic, soul-crushingly shallow romance between Priya and Caleb. Priya, girl, you can do so much better than this boring plank of wood. That said, as disappointing as the second season was, I'd still say that I generally enjoyed my time with the Total Drama Island revival. Yeah, its quality isn't exactly consistent, but neither was the original Total Dramas. It's fun, it's frustrating, it's memorable, it's exactly what you'd expect from a Total Drama revival, for better or for worse, with its highs mostly making up for its lows. It's just a shame that its release got messed up as badly as it did. I don't think this is David Zaslav's fault, but I'm choosing to blame him for this anyway. It has been nearly a year now. Just release this show in the US already. And while I'm here making demands, just make MK Yulia canon next season. You're not fooling anyone, Total Drama. All in all, just like the original series, the Total Drama revival is pretty good, except for when it isn't. So I guess that every yearly top cartoon list is also going to have a show that everyone loved that I personally couldn't quite click with. Unicorn Warriors Eternal is the latest show from the brilliant mind of Genndy Tartakovsky. It follows a team of legendary heroes known as Unicorn, who are regularly reincarnated to fight an evil that threatens to destroy all space and time. However, things don't go quite as planned, when this time, they're forced to be reincarnated in the bodies of teenagers. Further complicating things, one of the heroes, Melinda, doesn't fully take over her host's body, Emma, leaving her without the memories of her past life and unsure of who she actually is. Now, Unicorn Warriors Eternal is a good show in its own right, and there is a ton to love about it. For starters, I absolutely adore the setting. The world of Unicorn Warriors Eternal is one where essentially all myths and legends are real. It's a place where Arthurian legend, kitsunes, elves, werewolves, and magic of all sorts coexist in steampunk London. The setting is just such a fun mishmash of different ideas that you never quite know what it'll throw at you next. Also, unsurprising for a Genndy Tartakovsky cartoon, this show is just gorgeous. The art style has a very distinct look that takes inspiration from both Fletcher cartoons and the works of Osamu Tezuka, making for some very memorable character designs that complement the great animation and sick action sequences. However, for all of its merit, Unicorn Warriors Eternal is seriously held back by the fact that I just wasn't engaged with the titular team. That isn't to say that the characters are bad by any means, it's just that, outside of Emmelinda, I didn't find them to be all that interesting. Edgy doesn't really have a lot going on, besides trying to get Melinda back, and it isn't until episode 7 where we get his backstory and greater insight into his character. Sang, meanwhile, while entertaining, didn't really get much of anything to do in the plot, due to his whole thing of existing in two planes of reality at once, detaching him from what's going on half the time. I also didn't get that much of a sense that the group developed any serious camaraderie. The team's dynamic doesn't really change or grow at all, and even though Emmelinda does get quite a bit of interesting character development, there isn't a sense that a relationship with her teammates evolved in any way. The group's dynamic does get more interesting once Winston joins, with his unconditional love for Emma, his rivalry with Edred, and general enthusiasm over getting to help out, adding some much needed flavor to the team. Unfortunately, he joined a bit too little too late, and it wasn't quite enough for me to get invested in Unicorn, which in turn made it difficult for me to get invested in the plot. Like for example, Copernicus, the team's robot companion, is destroyed at the end of episode 5. It's supposed to be this big dramatic moment, and Emmelinda is completely torn apart by this, but it doesn't land for me, because the show didn't really dedicate any time to the two of them bonding. There just wasn't a sense that Emmelinda became close with Copernicus, making her determination to get him fixed feel kind of unearned. There's also unnecessary romance, complete with a love triangle, because of course there is. Granted, it's not as annoying as it is in Haley's On It, since it doesn't distract too much from the plot, but it still feels totally unneeded, especially given that I don't find Emmelinda's relationships with either Edred or Winston to be particularly interesting. Again though, it could have been worse. At least it didn't make me hate most of the characters involved, like in Starverse. Oh wait, I've already passed my once a video limit on racking on Starverses. At least it wasn't The Legend of Korra? A show that I've never watched? Is this anything? Anyways, I think the characters in conflict would have been more interesting had the heroes not been able to have taken over their host bodies at all, but instead granted them their powers and could only act as spiritual advisors, unable to get in on the action. From the bits we see of them, it seemed like Stang and Edred's hosts, Alfie and Dimitri, had pretty interesting backgrounds and could have been compelling characters in their own right. It's such a shame that Emma's the only one of the three who has any sort of presence. Just seeing this unlikely trio of strangers having to work together and gradually grow closer would have made for a much more interesting team dynamic in my opinion. Overall, I personally consider Unicorn Warriors Eternal to be the weakest of Gendy's shows, though that isn't to say that it's anywhere near bad. Gendy at his worst is still able to deliver at least a 7 out of 10 show. I just don't think this lived up to its fullest potential. Regardless, it's still a fun watch with striking visuals, a great premise, and an engaging setting that's only held back by the meh character writing. And even with all of my criticisms, with the very interesting note that this season ended on, if there's more Unicorn in store for the future, I'm definitely going to check it out.
I went to college!
You know how this show makes Buster and Babs Bunny, no relation, twins when they were love interests in the original series? That's kind of weird. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, Tiny Toons University is a reboot of the classic series Tiny Toon Adventures. Like the original series, it follows Buster and Babs Bunny, relation, who aspire to become great toons by learning under the all-time greats at Acme University, which is reimagined here as a college, alongside all of the other classic Tiny Toons characters. Now, admittedly, I don't really have much of a history with Tiny Toons. I watched it back when it was rerun on Nickelodeon, but I haven't engaged with this property in over 15 years. So I'm not entirely sure if my enjoyment of University will have changed one way or the other if I had a stronger attachment to Tiny Toons. Regardless, I think that Tiny Toons University is a pretty good time. Unlike the original show, instead of a sketch comedy format, Tiny Toons University opts to have its episodes consist of a single 22-minute story, with the conflicts honestly being pretty relatable, like signing up for a class you thought would be an easy A, only for it to end up kicking your ass, and struggling with the pressure of having to decide your own path in life. Of course, these plots have their own distinct Looney twists, giving this show a pretty unique vibe from any other Looney Tunes project. Think of it as sort of a middle ground between the original Tiny Toons and the Looney Tunes show. Which leads to what I appreciate the most about Tiny Toons University, its commitment to just being its own thing. It would have been easy to simply have this show be Tiny Toon Adventures again, and probably would have turned out perfectly fine, if not a bit off, similar to the Animaniacs reboot. But instead, it decided to take a risk and try to go for something entirely different, which I think managed to pay off. This can be best seen through the voice acting. Bringing up Animaniacs 2020 again, in contrast to that reboot, the voice cast here is entirely different from the original Tiny Toons, and I think they all do a stellar job. Most of them sound noticeably different from the original actors, but the voices still feel like they fit the characters pretty well.
Hello! I was just talking about you. Oh no, it was good. Oh yay!
I genuinely appreciate the show's willingness to let the performers give their own spin on these characters, and just really make them their own. Speaking of which, the characters are all pretty fun too. Yeah, the decision to make Buster and Babs related is weird, but it doesn't take long to get used to, and the two have a really fun, believable sibling dynamic. Of the main cast, Plucky was probably the highlight for me. Bro gives off mad Birdly energy, and I'm super here for it. Although I relate to Hampton the most, who is just pure social anxiety. Also, the animation is pretty great for the most part, although there are times when the use of motion tweening is really noticeable. The reason why Tiny Toons University isn't higher up on the list is that, despite being consistently good and not really having that many issues, I simply don't think that it reaches the same heights of other cartoons from 2023. Again, maybe it'd be higher up if Tiny Toon Adventures was a greater part of my childhood, but it's still a pretty good watch, despite the fact that it makes me think about college. I still have nightmares.
Vacation time. So much fun.
Prior to the series announcement, I had no idea how badly I needed to see Pokemon in stop motion. My god, I am so glad that we have this. Based on the hit multimedia franchise, Pokemon Concierge follows Haru, a stressed-out young woman who takes a job as a concierge at the prestigious Pokemon Resort, where she's tasked with taking care of Pokemon staying there and showing them a fun, relaxing time. Once Haru's adjusted to her new job, this show is just cozy vibes central and I can't get enough of it. Before I go any further though, now, I feel like I should address a thought that's probably going through some people's minds. Pokemon Concierge is an anime. What's this show doing in a list ranking cartoons? And to that I say... Anime are cartoons, cartoons are anime, and Avatar The Last Airbender is the greatest anime of all time. And now that I've alienated half the anime fans watching, dear lord, this show is so wholesome. Listen, I'm a simple man. When I see videos and anime clips of Pokemon showing out and being adorable, I'm always instantly invested. So when your show's entire premise is about a variety of Pokemon being happy and pampered, there's no way that I'm not tuning in. Especially when these Pokemon are brought to life with some excellent stop motion. I absolutely love the way the show looks. The models they use are super adorable, and I love how fluffy most of them look. While the stories are simple and the characters aren't exactly compelling, that doesn't make this show any less of a delightful watch. It's just super sweet seeing Haru bonding with and caring for all of these Pokemon. It's too bad this show is so ridiculously short. The entirety of Pokemon Concierge can be finished in roughly an hour, which is a shame because with there being over 1,000 of them now, there were no shortage of stories you could tell about Haru and her Psyduck buddy, vibing with different Pokemon staying at the resort. It also would have given us more time with Haru's boss and co-workers, who don't really get much to do here. They have so little of a presence that I couldn't even tell you their names, let alone anything about their personalities. Hey, Future Sockman here. So in the time since I recorded this segment, more episodes of Pokemon Concierge were ordered, basically rendering this complaint about the length almost entirely null and void. I am pointing this out just to remind y'all of how fucking long this video has taken for me to make. I am only a quarter of the way finished making it on the day I'm recording this, and I am already exhausted. Now back to your previously scheduled ramblings. My god, this was such a bad idea. Now admittedly, because of the simple narrative and characters, as well as the short length, there really isn't that much to say about the show beyond that it's cute and pretty to look at. But with a premise like this, that's all Pokemon Concierge really needs to be. A cute, fun little time waster that lets you unwind in the world of Pokemon. It's nothing deep, but if you're a Pokemon fan, there's no doubt that this show will put a stupid grin on your face like it did mine. Aqua Teen Hunger Force is kind of a strange beast when it comes to revivals, whether it be due to having a different staff, or a response to ever-changing social norms. Whenever a show comes back from cancellation, even after a few years, it usually ends up having a different vibe from its original run. However, with Aqua Teen, at least in terms of its writing, it generally feels like the show never left. I'm sure we all know what the series is all about, but for those who need a refresher, Aqua Teen Hunger Force is an absolutely bizarre, absurdist Adult Swim comedy following a trio of anthropomorphic food people and their neighbor Carl, as they don't actually do a whole lot. They usually just kind of hang around at their home while weird crap happens to them. The stories are absolutely nonsensical, with little in the way of structure or logical progression, and it is very funny. The Aqua Teen revival is more of what you love about the show, and that's really it. It's more Aqua Teen antics, and that's all we really need from it. However, while the writing and tone are still the same, like in Aqua Teen Hunger Force Plantasm, the animation is far better than it was in the original show's run, as in the characters now move more than 2 frames per second. In literally any other show, this would unanimously be considered a good thing, but longtime fans are very split on this change. The thing about Aqua Teen Hunger Force is that, at the end of the day, this show is just a massive shitpost, and its deliberately cheap animation added to that vibe. It's part of what gave the show character. Now that Aqua Teen is well animated, I can't help but feel that it lost a little bit of what made it so charming to begin with. That said, once you get used to the not jank animation, it's easy to see that this is still the Aqua Teen Hunger Force we all know and love. The writing's still gleefully absurd, the villains are still memorable, and Carl still remains one of television's greatest characters. Also, despite my mixed feelings on the decision, I can still more than appreciate the effort they put into making the show look like it had a budget of more than $50 and a half-eaten cheeseburger, especially in the season premiere. God, I love how stylized the episode looked. Overall, yeah, it's Aqua Teen Hunger Force. It's still the same weird, funny Adult Swim cartoon that premiered all those years ago. I just wish that this season had more than 5 episodes. Just another reminder that Cartoon Network is still struggling. A fact that I'm choosing not to dwell on in my pitiful attempts at staying positive this video. Just gonna pretend that everything doesn't hurt.
Send in the clones!
And here we have the most divisive cartoon of 2023. After 20 long years, Clone High, the cult classic comedy from the minds of Chris Miller and Phil Lord, has finally made its grand return. Picking up 20 years after the end of the first season, the clones finally get thawed out, and now have to adjust to living in the 2020s. All the while, the secret board of shadowy figures still have plans for the clones in their nefarious plot to take over the world. Now, Clone High, despite its initial mixed reception, would go on to gain a massive cult following. With an off-the-wall premise, appealing art style, and sharp comedy, Clone High was an adult cartoon like no other, with many feeling that it was gone far too soon. So when it was announced in July 2020 that Clone High would be getting a revival, expectations were pretty high, especially given how Miller and Lord have since gained a reputation for directing and producing absolute banger movies and television shows. With all that in mind, when the Clone High revival ended up being not quite like the original series, more than a few fans were left disappointed, with some immediately writing off the revival as bad after the admittedly not great first episode. Seriously, can shows just please stop doing episodes on cancel culture? It has literally never worked. Just give it up. However, if you couldn't tell by the tone of this list, I rather enjoyed my time with the Clone High revival, and I think that's partly because, unlike some, I didn't watch the original show until around spring 2020, just a few months before the revival's announcement, so I wasn't yearning for a continuation for nearly as long as other fans, meaning I was probably less likely to be disappointed if it didn't live up to the original series. One of the most notable changes from the original series is the switch from frame-by-frame to rig-based animation, which was apparently done to make it easier to abide by Phil Lord's constant story revisions that would occur even during the final stages of animation. Seriously, Lord, do better. While the rigged animation is pretty good, it's much less snappy, and it takes a bit to get used to. Beyond that, Clone High still looks really nice, keeping its distinct angular look, great posing, and solid art direction. Meanwhile, the clones are every bit as entertaining as they were before, with Harriet, Confucius, and Frida being really fun additions to the main cast. I honestly don't have the same issues with their designs that other viewers do, although I'm not a fan of the neon color scheme they're rocking. It's really the only thing that keeps them from fitting in with the rest of the cast. As enjoyable as the new characters are though, it's still such a shame that Gandhi couldn't come back, you know, due to the whole angering India and getting the original show cancelled thing. Well, I think that the revival's proven that Clone High can function without him, and the new clones are enjoyable. They just cannot match Gandhi's energy. Although I'd be lying if I said that Topher didn't come pretty damn close. Seriously, making the clone of Christopher Columbus into a raging incel is just brilliant writing. Not even the revival's fiercest detractors could stop themselves from falling in love with this awful, awful little man.
My therapist requires that I have 3 social interactions every month, or I have to spend spring break at the asylum again. Anywho, you want to hang out later?
As for the non-clones, Dogsworth and Mr. B are still the best characters in the show, and Candace Sampson makes for a great comedic foil to the two. With all that said, it does take a bit for the Clone High revival to find a rhythm. Like I said earlier, its season 2 opener didn't exactly leave the best first impression, and while the show's quality significantly improved from episode 2 onwards, it still had kinks to work out. While I think that season 2 is, by and large, funny, the comedy just doesn't hit as hard as the first season. And I think that's because it initially lacks the over-the-top saturation of teen melodramas that helped define Clone High. Yeah, the general silliness of the first season is still there, but it just doesn't feel quite the same without the poking fun at teen dramas, which is especially egregious considering all the new material the writers have to work with. It isn't until the final 4 episodes when the revival really starts to come to its own. The comedy's sharper, the storytelling stronger, and we actually get some proper mockery of teen drama tropes, especially in the appropriately named For Your Consideration, which cements Mr. B as the most tragic character in all of television. Name someone who suffered more than this man. You know you can't. These improvements are carried over into season 3, which also introduces some really funny, wild ideas, like JFK finding religion, Bloody Mary inexplicably becoming integral to the plot, and recontextualizing Scudworth and Skunky Poo's dynamic as a romance. The revival is also not afraid to have sincere moments here and there, and they honestly honestly kind of worked. They're brief bits, and they fortunately don't detract from the show's all-around silly, tongue-in-cheek tone. This show still knows exactly what it is. So is the Clone High revival as good as the first season? Not quite, but I genuinely think that season 3 comes really close to matching the quality of the original series. It just doesn't quite have the same energy as the OG Clone High, nor does it have moments that are as iconic. Despite this though, I still really enjoyed my time with the Clone High revival. Again, it takes a bit for it to find a rhythm, but when it finally does, it manages to be a really funny, creative show in its own right. And that cliffhanger ending, man, I can't wait to see how it gets resolved in 2044. I say this as a joke, but I don't think I need to remind you of the state of streaming. And I was so close to making it through this section without complaining about the entertainment industry. What is wrong with me?
My name is Cleveland Brown.
I feel like a common problem you tend to see in cartoon spin-offs is that they often struggle to differentiate themselves from their parent shows and form an identity of their own, making you question why they even exist to begin with. Fortunately, this very much isn't the case with Jessica's Big Little World. A spin-off of the hit Cartoon Network show Craig of the Creek, Jessica's Big Little World is a preschool show made for the ill-fated Cartoonito, centering on Craig's little sister, Jessica, as she challenges herself to become a big kid, and it is adorable. Despite also being a slice-of-life show starring an imaginative black kid, and sharing much of the same main cast as Craig of the Creek, Jessica's Big Little World is able to stand on its own as a really charming series with a unique style and approach that separates it from its parent show. While there's a sense of adventure and excitement in the way that Craig of the Creek portrays what's essentially children LARPing, Jessica's Big Little World is a more chill show with far lower stakes, where Jessica deals with pretty mundane situations that involve her either taking on a new responsibility or tackling a new experience, all out of a desire to grow up and become more independent. Despite the stories being simpler, the show never feels like it's talking down to its audience, with the writing having the same level of charm and humor as Craig of the Creek. What I really love about this show is how it perfectly portrays the way that younger kids will treat the absolute smallest things as this massive deal. Like there's this one episode where Jessica meets this girl while on a trip to the grocery store, and the two of them become inseparable after literally a minute of knowing each other. Having this heartfelt goodbye when they have to go their separate ways, followed up by this tearful reunion when they almost immediately run into each other again. That is just such a kid thing to do. It's stuff like this that makes Jessica such a fun character to follow. The way she takes things like learning to get ready to bed on her own, or going to a big kid's playground for the first time so seriously is super charming. Jessica is someone who approaches new experiences with so much confidence and determination, while simultaneously not quite understanding how some things work. Again, it's such a kid way to act. This is also the rare spin-off cartoon that actually puts in the effort to look visually distinct from the show that spawned it. Having this really nice pastel color palette that adds to the sense of wonder that this series is going for. Unfortunately, this show isn't long for this world. Jessica's Big Little World is set to end after 20 episodes, half of the planned episode count, because David Zaslav can't make up his damn mind as to what kinds of projects he wants Warner Brothers to prioritize. It's a shame too, because it's a really cute, fun show that manages to avoid the typical trappings you usually see in spin-off cartoons. Regardless, if you're a fan of Craig of the Creek, Jessica's Big Little World is very much worth your time. It has the same witty writing of the show it's based on, while also having its own unique style. Also, mad props for it being the rare spin-off show that isn't about the main character moving to a new location, making it one less spin-off to compare to the Cleveland show. Thank God.
Squirrel, 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 squirrel.
Now this is a lighthearted episodic Disney Channel cartoon that I can fully get behind. Kif is a fun little show centering on Kif Chatterley, a determined, upbeat squirrel who, along with her best friend, the good-natured goofball Barry Buns, gets into all kinds of misadventures in her home of Tabletown. Now due to this being a goofy episodic Disney Channel cartoon, like similar shows before it, plenty of people have turned their noses up at Kif for not being quote-unquote serious and blame it for the Owl House's cancellation, even though that's literally not how anything works. Like, at all. And look, don't get me wrong, I love story-driven cartoons as much as the next guy, but sometimes I'm not in the mood to get reacquainted with a big ambitious overarching narrative with complex characters going through complex emotions. Sometimes I just want to put on a random episode of a charming, straightforward slice-of-life cartoon that will make me laugh. And in that regard, Kif is king, yo. Most of the people watching this probably didn't get that reference, but I'm still proud of myself for finding a way to force it into the script. A lot of this show's charm stems from how fun fun of a main character Kif is. She's an outgoing, positive go-getter who loves helping others, but tends to get really carried away when it comes to standing up for things she believes in. Like the previously mentioned Jessica, Kif has that kid mindset of every little thing being the biggest deal in the world. The difference is that when Kif sets her mind on something, when she sees something she perceives as an injustice, no matter how minor the situation is, she will not let it go, and things will always escalate with hilarious results. She's the kind of character who will arbitrarily decide one morning that she doesn't want to brush her teeth, and will spend literally the entire day trying to get out of it because she's convinced her mom's on a power trip. The always great Kimiko Glenn does a wonderful job of giving Kif this energy that always makes her a blast to watch.
It's my year to make the halfway dinner. It's the best night of the year. I'm gonna get it perfect. I mean, get it 50%. It's gonna be great.
Playing off of Kif is her best buddy Barry, who's every bit as silly as her while being more laid back and sensitive. The two of them have such an endearing friendship. They're just a pair of goofball kids who think the absolute world of each other, and I love seeing their antics. While the characters, most notably Kif, have plenty of great expressions, the show usually isn't all that much to write home about visually, although the animation can be really good from time to time. Kif also has song sequences, all of which are certified bangers that are equal parts funny and catchy. This is just an all-around really fun show with an offbeat sense of humor that complements its upbeat, positive tone. I really do hope that Kif ends up going the way of Big City Greens, and that the cartoon community eventually recognizes its merit, despite it not having an overarching narrative. It might not be one of Disney Channel's all-time greats, but honestly it doesn't have to be. Kif is just a funny, silly romp, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Oh, would you look at that? A really good Netflix animated series that hasn't gotten any promotion whatsoever. Never heard that one before. My Dad the Bounty Hunter follows Terry, whose commitment to his job has led him and his wife, Tess, to separate, and is putting a strain on his relationship with his kids, Lisa and Sean. When his kids sneak off to go with him to his work, they discover that their father is actually a renowned galactic bounty hunter, and Terry is forced to let them tag along while he pursues his way as target, with things spiraling out of control from there. Beyond being a fun, family-friendly sci-fi show, My Dad the Bounty Hunter is a story of two loving parents who only want what's best for their kids, but that desire to give them what they believe to be an ideal life leads them to be dishonest and hurt their relationships with their Earth and space families. Despite their faults, you fully understand why Terry and Tess wanted to hide their respective histories as a space bounty hunter and an alien princess from their kids, even if it ended up doing more harm than good. There's never any doubt that these two prioritize the safety and happiness of their children above all else, and would both figuratively and literally go to the ends of the universe to protect them. Lisa and Sean, meanwhile, are really fun, well-written child characters. Lisa being a cynical, street-smart kid who always wants to get involved in the action, while Sean is just the sweetest thing with this infectious sense of wonder. The family as a whole is very believable, with a really sincere love and affection for one another. However, despite the family drama being handled well, it also isn't anything that you haven't seen before. With season 1 being your standard, Dad wants to provide for his family, but his work life is straining his relationship with them story, but with a sci-fi twist. It isn't until season 2 when, ironically enough, the mom becomes the main focus, that My Dad the Bounty Hunter's narrative really becomes engaging. Tessa's mysterious past as a princess of this Afrofuturist planet that she ran away from, her realization that she's become disconnected from her culture, and her conflict over whether or not she should let her kids know about their heritage is super interesting, and leads to a much more personal, engaging, higher stakes story. Also, I really think Tess needs to come up more in discussions about fierce black women in media. Like, this woman not just beat down the alien colonizer lady trying to destroy her planet, but turned her into boots that she wears. That is beyond metal. The CG of My Dad the Bounty Hunter also looks top notch, as in the visuals are near film level quality. The animation itself is well done, and the action is fairly well choreographed. I especially love how the 2D animated flashbacks look. All in all, My Dad the Bounty Hunter is a really good time, especially during its second season. It has everything you could ask for: humor, heart, action, and a My and the 3 reference. It's a fun show that definitely deserves more attention. Oh, and also, Keith David plays a sexy Catman. Come on, furries, get on that. I know you've watched worse shows for hot cat people. I think that there's a has-been hotel joke in there somewhere, but I really don't want to contribute to the discourse surrounding that show. You know, I really do think we're experiencing a renaissance in unapologetically black entertainment. Black romance, black horror, black superheroes. We really have been eating good lately. So it's only really appropriate that we're seeing a return in lighthearted, fun black sitcoms like Young Love. Based on Matthew A. Cherry's Academy Award-winning animated short film, Hair Love, Young Love follows millennial parents Stephen Love and Angela Young as they do their best to get by while trying to achieve their dreams. Oh, I get it. Their last names are Young and Love, and the title of the show is Yes. Mind-blowing revelations aside, I really do love the general conceit of Young Love. It's a show simply about their day-to-day lives of black millennials living in the 2020s, a unique viewpoint that you really don't get a lot of, especially in animation. I just think it's neat that we have an animated series that shows black millennials' viewpoints on topics like church and marriage, as well as that generation's unique struggles, namely the main conflict of Stephen and Angela trying to find fulfillment in life and struggling to turn their creative passions into a viable career, which really resonated with me for reasons that should be very obvious. Like, comment, and subscribe, by the way. Beyond that, Young Love is a fairly straightforward sitcom, focusing on a black family's daily lives and the situations they get into, and that's all it really needs to be because this show is just delightful. Stephen and Angela are a super believable, endearing, supportive couple who have absolutely nothing but love for each other, although their daughter Zuri ended up stealing the show for me. I love how the antics she gets into range from trying to watch a scary movie with her friends to literally starting a religious cult surrounding her, as kids tend to do. Plus, she's just frigging adorable. The show's visuals are also really good, with great rigged animation and nice looking backgrounds. Admittedly, I don't have as much to say about Young Love as other shows on this list, since at the end of the day, it's a generally straightforward black sitcom, but that doesn't change the fact that it excels at what it sets out to do. It's a sweet, funny show that successfully filled my need for a fun animated black sitcom after the internet ruined the Proud Family for me.
4, I mean 5, I mean fire!
Hey guys, did you know that Disney Plus doesn't just make increasingly mediocre Marvel and Star Wars shows? Believe it or not, if you look really hard, you'll actually find original content in there, and some of it's actually good. Although I can't say I blame you for not knowing that, because God knows that Disney will not promote anything that isn't a big franchise. That said, it doesn't make it any less of a crime that Kizazimoto Generation Fire has hardly gotten any attention. Kizazimoto Generation Fire is an Afrofuturist anthology series completely animated in Africa, consisting of 10 stories, each with its own distinct visual and animation style that's gorgeous in its own right, while presenting an engaging, fully realized setting in the 11 minutes they're given. Now admittedly, it is a bit harder to discuss an anthology series than a traditional show, given that each episode throws you into an entirely different world, and there isn't a consistent cast of characters to discuss. So to remedy this, we'll be briefly discussing each episode in order from my least favorite to my favorite. That's right, we're doing a top 10 within a top 20, because clearly this video hasn't been running long enough. While a fun little romp with a likable lead, I simply found this one to have the least interesting premise. Probably the most memorable thing about this episode is how the main character looks like a Biz Pro fan child. This animation is gorgeous, but I just didn't click with the setting and premise like I did with other episodes. While not as stylish as the other CG episodes, Herder Boy is still a good introduction to the show with a solid narrative, cool designs, and great animation. Also, this one character has a Sans Undertale eye. I just find that funny. While the technology versus nature conflict at play wasn't anything that I haven't seen before, the gorgeous visuals, great designs, and intriguing backstory were more than enough to keep my attention. A fun, exciting time travel story with a truly gorgeous setting. This one probably has my favorite premise, with it taking place in a world where social media influencers are literal gods. You Give Me Heart commentates on the toll that social media and content creation takes on others, as well as the grasp it has on society in a really creative and fun way, while giving us some really great character designs. One of my favorite looking episodes, boasting gorgeous watercolor backgrounds, great character designs, and a beautiful blend of 2D and 3D animation. While the story is also great, I just wish there was a bit more time spent with Moremi and Wuo together. Leave it to this show to have an actually interesting take on the overworked parent doesn't have time for their kid's story by having the parent be a literal god. I love the stop motion look of the CG animation, as well as the sweet relationship between Shiro and Inkai. I especially appreciate the bittersweet but ultimately hopeful note that this episode ends on. Easily the darkest story of the bunch that focuses on a surfing prodigy grappling with the death of his grandmother. I love the absolutely frantic pacing of this one. It just adds to the greater level of danger and intensity on display when compared to the other stories. The animation is also stellar, being another super stylized episode that utilizes a blend of CG and 2D animation. And the climax is just an amazingly animated, well choreographed thrill ride. Dear God, Mkuzi the Spirit Racer is an absolute visual spectacle from start to finish, with a gorgeous Studio Trigger-esque art style, and stylish animation that is an absolute feast for the eyes. There's more than enough intrigue to this premise, as well as Manzo as a character, to base an entire series around. If we get more of this show, I sincerely hope we revisit this setting, because I need more of this chaotic joyride in my life. Overall, while some episodes are stronger than others, Kizazimoto Generation Fire is a super fun, creative African anthology series that definitely deserves more attention. Seriously, Disney Plus, more of this, less of this. Between this and Superman and Lois, I think we finally escaped the era of DC trying to deconstruct Superman as a concept, and the world is a better place for it. My Adventures with Superman follows Clark Kent in his early years as the Man of Steel, trying to figure out who he is and where he comes from. There to help Clark out is his best friend and roommate Jimmy Olsen, as well as Daily Planet colleague and totally not something deeper, Lois Lane. All the while, a mysterious government agency, who's seen what Superman's capable of, aims to take him down. Now before I start singing this show's praises, I want to take a break from my quite frankly desperate attempts at not being a depressed cynic, just to ask one thing. What on earth is it about this show that welcomed literally all of the worst takes imaginable? The discourse surrounding this show has effectively killed any doubt I had that basic media literacy is dead. Seriously, I will never forgive how the internet treated Lois, because how dare she get upset that the man she was developing an intimate relationship with was hiding this double life from her even after giving him multiple chances to fess up. Oh, but that's not how Jazz reacted when she learned Danny's secret identity. Yeah, it's almost like Lois and Jazz are two very different characters with very different relationships with the heroes. In fact, it'd be really fucking weird if Jazz reacted the way Lois did, given that she and Danny are teenage siblings. But Lois would never go as far as to throw herself off a building in order to prove Clark's Superman. You know, except for all the times she did. And would you look at that, when Clark apologized and properly communicated with her in the following episode, Lois understood his mindset and the two made up. Do y'all want more serialized cartoons or not? Because you guys really don't seem to understand the concept of a storyline spanning multiple episodes and waiting to see how it all plays out before making definitive statements about the narrative in its entirety. Gee, it's almost like there are misogynistic so-called comic book fans out there who will do anything to blindly vilify a woman character. Then again, what was I expecting from the same idiots who think that Rick and Morty invented the Alliance of Alternates trope? The Council of Loises is a take on Marvel's Council of Reeds, which was in turn a heroic counterpart to the Council of Kangs, who debuted in the mid-80s. And don't even get me started on how the racists act about Jimmy. How can you claim that your lame-ass whitewashed edits are fixing him when you're not giving him his iconic bow tie? You absolute... Okay, I think I got all that out of my system. Anyways, once you ignore all of the bigots and grifters telling you that Lois Lane is evil, My Adventures with Superman is an excellent take on the character as well as his mythos. First off, I absolutely adore this show's take on the Man of Steel himself. Not only is he the virtuous Boy Scout that we all hopefully expected Superman to be, but unlike so many recent iterations of this character, Clark is just an absolute dork. He's awkward, clumsy, mild-mannered, and it all makes him super endearing. At the end of the day, beyond all that incredible power, Superman is just a guy like you and me who just wants to do the right thing. He's not this Christ-like figure. He's a person with flaws and insecurities just like everyone else, and the show does a flawless job in capturing that. I just love this absolute golden retriever of a man. Very easily my favorite version of Superman to date. I also really like how Superman gradually unlocks more of his powers as the series progresses. It's a neat detail that adds to the shonen vibes that they're going for with this show. Speaking of which, My Adventures with Superman takes heavy influence from anime in both its tone and presentation. Like, Quark straight up gets a magical girl transformation sequence. I know that there are people who aren't super into the show's anime-esque look and say that it's too derivative of something like Voltron, but I don't know, I personally dig the art style. I like the majority of the character designs, and I didn't mind the technology theme that the villains were rocking. The show's antagonists being connected by Kryptonian technology makes sense for a story about Clark trying to figure out his origins. It adds a level of cohesion to the overarching narrative. I especially love how they adapted Parasite. That design is just sick. The only character adaptation that didn't really work for me was Slade, who's portrayed as this shonen pretty boy here, and not the irredeemably depraved old man that he is. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. If you're offering me a Slade who isn't an irredeemable monster, then I don't want him. I'm not even sure why he's even in this show when Bloodsport, a mercenary who's an actual Superman villain, was right there. James Gunn did not bring this character into relevancy just for you to do him like this. Come on. The animation's also well done with some super sick fight scenes. Now while all of the superhero action is fine and good, the true heart of My Adventures with Superman is Clark's relationship with Lois and Jimmy. Jimmy Olsen here is this conspiracy theorist with an infectious enthusiasm for all things otherworldly, and is just the kind of person who's always looking out for his friends. He's a fun character, but I really would appreciate it if cartoons realized that we have more than one hairstyle. And no, that's not giving you the go-ahead to give him the Killmonger cut. I just want variety. Lois Lane, meanwhile, is the same feisty, determined reporter who'll stop at nothing to get that big story. Which brings us to quite easily the best thing about My Adventures with Superman, the romance between Clark and Lois. Oh my lord, these two are just so head over heels in love with each other. I absolutely love seeing these two incredibly attractive, incredibly awkward people just being so sweet and soft around each other. The three of them just make for a super fun, ragtag group of friends. My only problem with the show is that there are points where the narrative moves a bit too fast. This season really would have benefited from being just 2 or 3 episodes longer. Beyond that though, My Adventures with Superman is a great take on the character that I really do believe will satisfy most fans. Let's just hope that the blue checkmarks lose interest in the show by season 2. I don't know if I can deal with a second round of Lois Lane slander.
We're going to Mars.
You know how whenever a bad adult cartoon comes out, the internet always complains about how adult animation is nothing but edgy comedies and that it needs more variety? Well, 1, watch Primal, you cowards. And 2, 2023 was an amazing year for adult animation that completely invalidates these claims. There were so many adult cartoons this past year that went against the grain and ended up offering experiences like no other. It's to the point where, save for number 3, every single show on this list from this point forward is an adult cartoon. So if you want to see what adult animation is truly capable of, you better show up for these amazing shows. Also, I'm just gonna get this out of the way. Blue Samurai isn't on this list. I'm sure it's as great as people make it out to be, but apparently the creators are Zionists, and with that knowledge, I do not feel comfortable supporting that show. Now with that out of the way, Fired on Mars. Taking place in the not too distant future, this adult animated series made for Max, God, that's still such a stupid name, sees Jeff, a graphic designer working on Mars for tech company Marsly, get his entire life turned upside down when his bosses abruptly decide to fire him, effectively stranding him on their colony without a job and leaving Jeff to struggle to find some sort of purpose in life. Fired on Mars is very much in that rare category of show that's an absolute work of art that I'm not sure I can ever rewatch again. Despite mostly being a workplace dramedy, I haven't felt this anxious and devastated watching a cartoon since freaking BoJack Horseman. Jeff's character elicits similar feelings from me that BoJack does. While nowhere near the walking travesty or stupid piece of shit that BoJack is, Jeff is a guy who just can't catch a break. He loses his girlfriend, no one really likes him, and he's at the constant mercy of corporate bigwigs who couldn't care less about him. You feel bad for him and you want to see him succeed, but Jeff just constantly makes stupid decision after stupid decision in his desire to have it all without picking a side. It's clear that at his core, Jeff isn't a bad person, which makes it absolutely frustrating and sad to see his ego and insecurities ruin the relationships in his life. Just like with BoJack, Jeff's constant bad decision making makes me want to step inside the show, pull Jeff aside, and tell him to stop whatever stupid bullcrap he's doing because he's better than this and it will inevitably blow up in his face. Speaking of which, nearly every episode ends with things going horribly wrong for Jeff, and once you pick up on that pattern early on, you start to feel this constant sense of dread that permeates all throughout the show. Even when it seems like things are finally looking up for Jeff, you are just waiting with bated breath for the moment where everything falls apart, and it is agonizing in the best possible way. Shows like Fired on Mars are the reason why most series need to release episodes weekly, as opposed to the ever-popular binge format. There is nothing like spending a week ruminating on Jeff's latest screw-up and anticipating the consequences for it. That right there is how you get viewers hooked. What makes Fired on Mars hurt the most, though, is that everything from how Marsley basically ruins Jeff's life, to the corruption and apathy of its higher-ups, to how it refuses to allow anyone to live life on Mars outside of their colony, feels grounded in reality. I fully believe that if we lived in a world where mankind successfully set up a colony on Mars, it would turn out exactly as the show presents it. No wonder, no adventure, just another means for a soulless corporation to spread its influence. At its core, this show is about the soul-crushing reality of working under a corporation, about how these companies will screw you over on a whim no matter how much you give to them. Despite this though, I wouldn't say that Fired on Mars is outright cynical. There are bits of levity to break up the drama, and the season ultimately ends on an optimistic note that feels fully earned. It shows that these greedy corporations don't have to be the future, and despite how bleak things get for Jeff, there's still hope for people like him to truly stand up to this messed up system. If that isn't enough to sell you on Fired on Mars, it's also that rare TVMA cartoon that doesn't try to be super edgy or vulgar, with the rating mostly coming from strong language. The show also has a pretty good art style that feels reminiscent of something like King of the Hill, as well as some truly gorgeous backgrounds that manage to make a barren wasteland like Mars look truly beautiful. All in all, Fired on Mars is a series that's more than worth your time. It's an unfortunate devastating look at life working at an office job that deserves way more eyes on it. All that said though, despite how great of a show this is, Fired on Mars isn't even Max's best adult sci-fi cartoon of 2023, which we will get to soon enough.
And a little bit of chicken fried.
Carol and the End of the World has to be one of the most unique, interesting takes on the idea of the end of the world that I've ever seen in a story. The show follows Carol, a middle-aged woman whose world is literally about to end, as a planet is set to collide with Earth in just 7 months, destroying humanity as we know it. However, unlike a lot of other stories dealing with an impending apocalypse, where everything immediately goes to crap and society collapses in on itself, everyone's pretty chill about it. It seems like everyone on Earth is using the time that they have left to live their lives to the fullest and enjoy themselves. Everyone except for Carol, who has no idea what to do with herself and is desperate to return to some semblance of normalcy, leading her to find a place called The Distraction, which exists to simulate a normal, impersonal work environment that people can come to in order to take their minds off of their impending doom. Now, in most pieces of media that center on the apocalypse, the emphasis is put on humanity's descent into chaos and focuses on a group that's either just trying to survive or working to find a way to stop it. Instead, this is the story of an ordinary person just grappling with the impending end in her own way. While you'd think that a story like this would be just plain depressing, despite the grim subject matter, the show's actually really uplifting. Yeah, the world's about to end, but like I said before, most of the people we see in this show are just choosing to live their best lives. In fact, the show's also pretty funny. I especially love the running gag of how there are just naked people everywhere, and it's never addressed by anyone in the show. Carol herself has to be one of my favorite protagonists in any cartoon. She's this monotone, soft-spoken, awkward middle-aged woman who constantly stumbles on her words. God, I just love the level of autism that this character radiates. Martha Kelly gives an absolutely stellar performance that's equal parts funny and emotional. She perfectly sells the anxiety and awkwardness that constantly exudes from this woman.
I'm very sorry. It was a really nice party. I like the dancing a bunch.
I especially love how Carol gradually comes out of her shell and ends up bringing people together in her own Carol way. This isn't the kind of character that you typically see as the main focus of an adult cartoon, and I'm glad that we've been getting a greater variety of perspectives from these shows. The thing about this show that really captivates me though, is its commentary on the concept of routine. While most stories involving routine are usually about breaking it and living life to the fullest, which is also present here to some extent, Carol and the End of the World also presents having a routine as perfectly normal and healthy. The problem with the distraction wasn't that they were doing this fake work routine when they should be living life to the fullest. The problem was that the work routine was miserable and impersonal when it really didn't have to be. Carol's grand act of rebellion against the distraction wasn't her taking it and completely turning it on its head. It was just her getting to know these people, learning their names, befriending them, and making the distraction just a warmer place to be. Like, Carol eventually breaks her work routine to go surfing around the world to find that perfect wave, but when she's satisfied with her trip, she goes back to work and it's not seen as a bad thing, because that's just what makes Carol happy. Hey, Future Sockman again. So in editing, it came to my attention that Carol indeed did not decide to take up surfing after lying to her parents about it, and that entire episode was nothing more than an extended version of that lie. So what I thought was meant to complement the main themes of the show was just me being a fucking idiot. Carol having an entirely different eye color that episode should have been a giveaway, but I guess I just didn't notice when writing the script. Why am I like this, man? Okay, now back to your regularly scheduled idiocy. God, I'm so fucking tired. It might not be the most exciting way to spend your last days on Earth, but the series shows that something as simple as going to an Applebee's with your coworkers each Friday can be every bit as fulfilling as skydiving or traveling the world. Side note, Carol and the End of the World is the single greatest advertisement Applebee's could ever ask for. You know your show's good when you can make a damn Applebee's feel like a place you would willingly go to. To put it simply, the End of the World is freaking terrifying, and not everyone wants to spend their last days on Earth doing these extreme, exciting things. For some, continuing to live a simple, mundane life is more than enough. It's a valid form of happiness. And as an autistic man who's very much comfortable with things remaining a certain way, this message honestly felt kind of validating to me. I did initially take some issue with how sort of abrupt the ending was, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The show doesn't end with any sort of big moment or showing us the end of the world, but with Carol and her co-workers having a good time at Applebee's as the planet grows closer to Earth. And honestly, I think that's all we really needed to see. At the end of the day, all that really matters is that Carol's going to spend the time she has left on Earth being happy with her friends and co-workers, and that's just really beautiful. Yet another word I never thought I'd use to describe a show about the inevitability of the end of the world. There really isn't anything quite like Carol and the End of the World. It's able to tackle such a terrifying topic in such a genuinely thought-provoking, fun, and honestly kind of comforting way, all from a viewpoint that we rarely see in adult cartoons. Even though it's not number one on this list, Carol and the End of the World might be the most different and new cartoon on here, and it is more than worth your time.
Hey y'all, Scott here.
Second verse, same as the first. Cartoons and anime are basically the same, and I just really want to talk about Scott Pilgrim. Anyways, admittedly, I can't say that I have the strongest connection to the Scott Pilgrim property. My only real exposure to the franchise was through the movie, and while I thoroughly enjoyed it, I also haven't watched it in, I think, a decade. Regardless, when a Scott Pilgrim animated series was announced, I was very interested in seeing what this show had to offer, especially given the amount of material from the comics that was apparently cut from the movie. Taking place in the magical land of Canada, where fights to the death are commonplace, people explode into coins when they die, and veganism gives you superpowers, Scott Pilgrim, a 23-year-old emotionally stunted man-child, meets the girl of his dreams, Ramona Flowers. However, before he can get with her, Scott must fight and defeat Ramona's 7 evil exes, who form their own league and will stop at nothing to kill him. It's a pretty faithful adaptation of the comics, hitting the same narrative beats of the original story, albeit with some minor alterations. One of the more noticeable changes being Scott dying at the end of the first episode. I'm sorry, what? I cannot remember the last time I was so utterly blindsided by a piece of media. What initially seems like a straightforward adaptation of the comics immediately becomes a radically different beast. From episode 2 onwards, the show's no longer about Scott fighting Ramona's evil exes, but instead, Ramona trying to uncover just what exactly happened to Scott, and things just get wilder from there. Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is everything I love to see in adaptations and reimaginings. It's an adaptation that goes completely off script and makes wild wild changes that don't just stop at making Ramona the main protagonist. Knives joins Sex Bomb, Wallace and Todd have a steamy love affair, Matthew Patel goes from being a jobber to the coolest character in the entire show, and that's not even getting into the big twist towards the end, which is absolutely ridiculous, but makes perfect sense for the world of Scott Pilgrim. The show just has so much fun playing with audiences' expectations and turning the world of Scott Pilgrim completely on its head. There is some serious Final Fantasy VII Remake nonsense going on here, and it is an absolute blast to see unfold. What I especially love about this show is the way that it expands upon its cast, most notably the League of Evil X's, who ended up stealing the show for me. While they were already entertaining characters in their own right, the Evil X's were generally one-note jerks who mainly served as obstacles for Scott to overcome. Scott Pilgrim Takes Off gives them a lot more depth, as well as much greater insight into their respective relationships with Ramona. They're such fun characters here, and it's just really heartwarming to see Ramona make peace with each of them. Even with all of these changes, the show still maintains the spirit of Scott Pilgrim, still having that same offbeat sense of humor, also perfectly adapting the comic's charming art style, and giving us some gloriously animated, appropriately ridiculous action sequences. All of this is complemented by the entire cast of the 2010 film, reprising their roles for the show, most of whom managed to deliver pretty good performances. While the many ways that it diverges from the source material has made this show controversial in some circles, and by some circles, I mean cowards, I personally adored Scott Pilgrim Takes Off from start to finish. It's a fun, absurd, wild ride, and I desperately need more adaptations and remakes that go completely nuts like this one. And now we're approaching the top 3, which are not only my favorite cartoons of the entire decade so far, but some of my all-time favorites period. So prepare yourselves for non-stop gushing from this point forward.
Do you feel it? The moon's power.
Do you remember earlier when I said that the cartoon community tends to ignore Disney Channel cartoons that aren't these epic, super serialized narratives? This also applies to Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. Only instead of missing out on a goofy, fun little cartoon, people are overlooking a damn work of art. This show, right here, is the best thing to ever come out of Disney Channel. Gravity Falls, The Owl House, the show with Marcy Wu in it, they cannot compare to the absolute greatness that is Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. Oh, but it's Marvel, and the MCU's gotten so bad. Now look at me! Look at me. The MCU could never. Based on the Marvel Comics characters of the same name, who I won't even pretend I heard of prior to this show, Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur follows Lunella Lafayette, a teen genius who accidentally opens a portal to another dimension, as you do, and summons an alien dinosaur whom she dubs Devil. Quickly forming a bond, the two of them become superheroes, dedicated to defending the LES from all sorts of villains. Let's start with the visuals, because my god, this show is just drop-dead gorgeous. No surprise, since this series was done by Studio Flying Bark, the mad lads behind Rise of the TMNT, one of the most visually stunning made-for-television cartoons ever created. Moon Girl has that same stylish art direction and animation that you've come to expect from the studio. Animation that can be snappy or fluid when the situation calls for it, thick outlines, great posing, well done character acting, this show has it all. There's also plenty of neat visual touches, like the backgrounds having comic book patterns, and the way that Lunella's goggles emote with her. And when Moon Girl pulls out that cassette player, you know you're about to get a sick as hell action scene, always accompanied by an original or licensed song. I gotta say, it's so refreshing to see a Marvel animated series with this much visual flair after Marvel Animation spent most of the 2010s giving us drab, boring looking shows. Moon Girl herself is such a well written lead character. She's good hearted, intelligent, and confident in her own abilities, but she's also socially awkward, and her confidence often leads to her getting way in over her head. Meanwhile, Devil is just the goodest boy, and I love his relationship with Lunella. Casey, Lunella's best friend, might be my favorite character in the show. I don't know, just the idea of this energetic, phoneaholic teen also being this hyper-competent manager slash assistant is super funny to me. Lunella's family is also plenty of fun, and they all have a very believable, loving bond with one another. Another great thing about Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur is how it tackles black topics in really creative, inventive ways. Like in Here Today, Gone Tomorrow, where a comment from one of her classmates lights causes Lunella to become self-conscious about her natural hair, which leads to her losing her hair and said hair becoming a supervillain. Or like Mother Like Moon Girl, where Moon Girl fights back against the gentrification of the LES, which by the way, has one of the most powerful sequences in the entire show. Like damn, this show goes so hard. I have never seen these kinds of stories get told in children's shows before, and I love that black kids today get to grow up watching strong, uncompromisingly black shows like this one. Then there's the tone of Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, which is just super refreshing and I don't think gets enough praise. This is a cartoon that isn't afraid to embrace the silliness of comic books, with lighthearted, entertaining plots, a variety of fun villains, and just great comedy all around. Seriously, Moon Girl straight up turns the Beyonder into this trickster Tumblr sexy man, voiced by Lawrence Fishburne, complete with his own killer villain song. At the same time though, Moon Girl is able to be heavy and emotional, without feeling the need to make the entire show quote-unquote serious, or have this big ongoing narrative like so many other cartoons. Yes, the show isn't as story or continuity driven as Amphibia or The Owl House, but that doesn't prevent it from having emotional beats that hit just as hard as both of those shows. Like the season 2 premiere has Lunella get brutalized by a villain in such a visceral, genuinely upsetting way. The show was not pulling its punches. This guy was going to straight up murder this child. There's even a later episode where Lunella has a realistic depiction of a panic attack. I thought you people loved that. Why aren't you watching Moon Girl? What, are you afraid it's too silly? Afraid of shows with lighthearted episodic adventures? Is that it, cowards? Is that it? Overall, everything about Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur just works so well. The humor, the heart, the characters, the writing, the animation, all of it is just amazing. Please, go watch this show as soon as possible. It truly is something special and deserves way more attention than it's gotten. It's an absolute 10 out of 10 banger, and quite easily the best thing to come out of Marvel TV animation. Spectacular Spider-Man, you had your time in the sun, but you just can't beat that Moon Girl magic.
Where in the world are we?
Stop this video right now and go watch Scavenger's Reign. Nothing that I can say in this video can properly articulate how much of an absolute triumph in animation this series is. Like Fired on Mars, I've barely seen anyone talk about this show, so I want everyone who hasn't already to drop whatever you're doing and watch this absolute masterpiece on Max, because I don't want anyone's first experience with this work of art to be some moron on YouTube trying to explain why it's amazing. Seriously, go now because there will be spoilers. Pause the video. I can wait. Okay, are you back? Has your life been changed? Great. Now let's get into it. Scavenger Reigns follows the crew members of a cargo ship that crash lands onto an alien planet as they struggle to survive in a strange new world that's equal parts beautiful and terrifying. While the series divides its attention between three pairs of characters, Ursula and Sam, Ozzy and Levi, and Cayman and the Hollow, the real star here is the planet this show's set on. Scavenger's Reign is one of those works where its setting has so much personality, is so teeming with life, that it feels like a character in itself. This planet is filled with so many beautiful, varied environments, as well as numerous alien creatures with creative concepts and memorable designs. There's so much thought and creativity in how the wildlife operate, straight down to the way they move, that makes each creature downright mesmerizing to watch. Scavenger's Reign also has these little atmospheric scenes where we just see how the inhabitants of this strange world operate. Take this one sequence where Ursula is just drawn in by this little alien, who she watches go through its entire life cycle over the course of a few minutes. What was its purpose? Why did this organism birth it? I have no idea, but honestly, it doesn't matter. Just like Ursula, I'm just left captivated by how both alien and beautiful this moment is. It's moments like these that make this world feel all the more alive. On top of its jaw-dropping beauty, the setting also offers gloriously horrific concepts that lead to some truly gruesome body horror. The stellar sound design and score only add to how utterly mesmerizing this world is to watch. Everything about the way this alien world is presented is just phenomenal. Not since Primal have I felt myself get so completely sucked into a show's world. All of the main characters have interesting stories and dynamics, but what makes them truly fascinating is the way that the alien world changes them, both for the better and for the worse. Ursula and Sam probably have the most straightforward storyline, with the two having polar opposite views in regards to their situation. While Sam's sole concern is understandably to get them off this planet as soon as possible, Ursula Ursula is able to see the genuine beauty within this alien world, and is interested in learning more about it. They easily go through the most horrific crap out the entire cast, which makes it all the more poignant when, in Sam's final moments, he finally sees what Ursula saw on the planet. Then there's Ozzy, an emotionally distant, aloof cargo worker, and my personal favorite, Levi, a robot meant to aid her. At the start, Ozzy treats Levi as nothing more than a burden that she's stuck with, but over time, she starts noticing her robotic companion changing. Levi begins thinking for herself, she starts creating things, she starts to recognize the feeling of touch. This planet, by some miracle, caused Levi to become alive, which Ozzy gradually notices, and it leads her to slowly develop sincere care for Levi, and to see her as not just some machine, but a true friend. It's honestly really touching seeing how the relationship between these two develops, especially the way Levi comes to embody the awe-inspiring miracle that is nature. Then there's Cayman and the Hollow, who serve as a dark reflection of Ozzy and Levi. The Hollow, this little psychic alien, starts off completely unassuming, but gradually becomes something truly monstrous. Tired of being so low on the food chain, it finds Cayman and quickly recognizes the destructive potential of humans. Using its abilities to flood Cayman's mind with happy memories of him and his ex-wife, the Hollow puts him under its spell, having him kill progressively bigger, more dangerous creatures for it to devour, assaulting Cayman with painful memories whenever it's displeased. Eventually growing to gargantuan size, the Hollow finally breaks this sad, pathetic shell of a man, and becomes one with him, cementing itself as the apex predator of its world, and destroying anyone and anything that may take Cayman away from him. The Hollow is easily one of my favorite animated villains to come out of the 2020s. This thing is just a cold, ruthless, terrifying predator, motivated solely by greed, who embodies the cruel, uncaring side of nature, which makes it all the more fitting that this monstrous creature native to this planet, having fallen into depravity as a result of exploiting this human, whose lust for supremacy led to so much needless destruction, is ultimately defeated by Levi, a machine who came to value this planet, who forged a true connection with its inhabitants, who developed a love for life, in a truly breathtaking sequence where she basically overwhelms it with visions of the planet's beauty and wonder. Seriously, the parallels between Levi and the Hollow's journeys are just brilliant. Scavenger's Reign is quite literally everything people have been asking out of adult cartoons. The concept is great, the setting is beautiful and captivating, the animation is stellar, the art style is distinct and appealing, the atmosphere is amazing. I'm not exaggerating when I say that Scavenger's Reign is flawless in every way, and quite easily one of my favorite shows of all time. So why isn't this number one? Well, if I'm being perfectly honest, Scavenger's Reign is the best show on this list, but there was just one other cartoon out there that meant way too much to me for it to not be at number one. A show that I already knew was going to come out on top even before it premiered. That show being... You know, with how often I use clips from the show and music from the games, it's weird that I haven't talked all that much about Adventure Time on this channel, considering that it's straight up my favorite thing ever. There honestly isn't a single piece of media that has managed to elicit the same range of emotions for me that Adventure Time has. I'm not exaggerating when I say that I don't think I would have the same love for animation that I do today if it weren't for Adventure Time. This series showed me what the medium was truly capable of. It can be funny, exciting, heartwarming, creative, thought-provoking, horrifying, soul-crushing, or even just plain weird. Adventure Time means everything to me. So naturally, I eat up anything and everything related to Adventure Time, with Fiona and Cake being no exception. Taking place 12 years after the end of Adventure Time, we're introduced to a very different Fiona and Cake, who are living in a magicless world and left yearning for an escape from their mundane lives. Meanwhile, Simon, having long since been freed from the Crown's influence, is struggling to find a purpose in life, being stuck in a world that he can't relate to, and is still trying in vain to bring Betty back. Through some universe-hopping shenanigans, their paths meet, and it's revealed that Prismo secretly created Fiona and Cake's world, and hid it within Simon's mind, back when he was still the Ice King, with their world becoming mundane as a result of him being cured of the Crown's madness. Now being hunted down by the God Auditor Scarab, the three must travel the multiverse and restore magic to Fiona and Cake's world, even if doing so means that Simon has to wear the crown once once more. Now admittedly, I was never super hot on Adventure Time's Fiona and Cake episodes beyond the first one. I mean, they were perfectly fine episodes, it's just that it never felt like a concept that Adventure Time needed to revisit as often as it did. Regardless, a young adult show centering on Fiona and Cake was still a very interesting concept, and given that it would prominently feature Simon, who was always my favorite character, both as himself and the Ice King, I figured that I'd enjoy myself regardless of my mostly neutral feelings towards the Fiona and Cake episodes. After all, Adventure Time rarely disappoints, so I went in with high expectations, and by the end, not only did Fiona and Cake exceed those expectations, but it somehow made me love and appreciate Adventure Time even more than I already did. For starters, I actually care about Fiona and Cake as characters now. Here, Fiona isn't just girl Finn, she's an entirely distinct person with her own unique struggles. She's this aimless mess of a woman who's constantly in between jobs, and is in search of a more magical, exciting existence. But when Fiona gets just that, she finds herself way out of her depth, leading her to gradually grow into a more thoughtful person who starts to recognize just what's at stake in this adventure. In contrast, Cake is having a great time adjusting to this magical adventure, absolutely loving her new stretchy abilities, as well as the fact that she finally has a voice she can call her own. Then we have Simon, who I think everyone agrees more or less stole the show. Following the end of Adventure Time, Simon, like Fiona, has become sad and aimless. Sure, he's free from the Crown's influence, but Fiona and Cake asks the question, what now? What does Simon do in a world that's strange and alien to him? What purpose does he serve? More importantly though, after 13 years, Fiona and Cake finally led Simon Petrikov to reach the Tumblr sexy man status that he always deserved. Seriously, where were you guys on that? This man was Tumblr sexy man material even back when he was just Ice King. Cowards! Cowards, all of you! Then there's the whole multiverse angle. Well, pretty much everyone agrees that the idea of the multiverse has long since been overdone, Fiona and Cake handles it brilliantly, and more than earns its place alongside Everything Everywhere All at Once and Across the Spider-Verse as a part of the holy trinity of fully justified 2020's multiverse stories. This isn't your run-of-the-mill multiverse plot, where the concept only amounts to, what if everyone were pirates? Or, remember this iteration of a character from your childhood? Well, here you go. The what ifs Fiona and Cake bring to the table are genuinely captivating. A universe where Ice King and PB's roles are swapped. A universe where the Vampire King raised a young Marceline instead of Simon. A universe where the freaking witch won. These are all such fascinating, fun, fully realized ideas that the show executes masterfully. I mean, there is fan service for Adventure Time fans, like the return of Farm World and Charmy and Beth's future Ooh, but the main purpose of revisiting these worlds isn't to get audiences to reenact the Leonardo DiCaprio meme. Like all good multiverse stories should, all of these different universes primarily serve as a means to further Fiona and Simon's character development. To be more specific, Fiona's experiences in these worlds lead to her realizing that this adventure isn't the escapist fantasy she dreamed of, and gradually come to see the value in her ordinary world. Meanwhile, Simon comes out of this realizing the value in his own life. These worlds show that despite his faults, despite his mistakes, Simon isn't a failure. He's a good man who left a positive impact, and who would be a worse place without him. He doesn't need to throw his life away in order to give it meaning. The personal journeys that these two go on are absolutely gripping, and I love the way that they parallel each other. Fiona and Cake also makes great use of its TV-14 age rating. This isn't a situation where a kid's property gets reimagined into something needlessly edgy that constantly feels the need to remind you of how adult it is now. This feels like a natural evolution for Adventure Time, with the series using that age rating to dive deeper into more mature themes like existentialism in a way that the OG show couldn't, while also being able to get away with showing some blood and using PG swears. All the while, Fiona and Cake still maintains the humor and fun that Adventure Time's known for. Plus, as a depressed 27-year-old who has no idea what to do with his life, seeing a show that was so important to me in my adolescence tell a story about these two adults who've hit a rut eventually find meaning in their lives is something I think I really needed to see. On top of all that, the show takes the time to further expand upon Adventure Time's characters and concepts in a way that made me appreciate them even more. Simon was already one of my favorite characters in anything ever, and yet Fiona and Cake found a way to make me love him even more than I already did. It also continues the original show's deconstruction of the homicidal maniac / generic doomsday villain trope through the Lich, showing us that if he were to achieve his goal of destroying all life, he'd be left a hollow shell of his former self, not knowing knowing what his purpose in life is, similar to Fiona and Simon. I never thought I'd see the day where I'd find myself feeling genuine sympathy for an irredeemable monster like the Lich. I'm telling you, man, there's no other cartoon villain doing it like him. Bonus points for giving the Lich another killer monologue. Then there's Betty and her relationship with Simon. Yeah, their star-crossed romance in the original show was sad and all, but dear lord, seeing firsthand the sheer amount of sincere love she and Simon had for each other not only makes me love this pairing so much more, but it makes the weight of her sacrificing come along with me hit so much harder. I just love what they did with Simon and Betty's relationship here. While we learned that it wasn't perfect and that they made mistakes, it didn't make the love they had for each other any less real, and the bittersweet way that they wrap it up is just so satisfying. No notes, man. No notes. If there's one issue I have with the show though, it's the main villain, Scarab. Now Scarab's an effective enough obstacle for the characters, being this genuinely imposing figure with a pretty sick design. Personality wise though, he's just kind of your typical Knight Templar lawful evil type who's all about order and not much else. A perfectly fine villain, but is in nowhere near the same league as the Lich. Beyond that though, Fiona and Cake is an absolute triumph of a show. It does everything that a good sequel should. It takes the ideas of the previous installment and expands upon them in a compelling way that makes me appreciate the characters and world more than I already did. It's funny, it's mature, it's creative, it's weird, it's everything I could ever ask for in a follow-up to Adventure Time. And the fact that we're going to get more makes me absolutely ecstatic. Fiona and Cake is a fantastic show, a worthy continuation of Adventure Time, and my favorite cartoon of 2023. And there we have it. Those were my top cartoons of 2023. Now admittedly, things were a bit touch and go with the whole positive attitude thing, but I think that this little journey we've been on for the past, oh dear god, nearly 90 minutes, has ultimately left me feeling more hopeful about humanity. Not by much, but any world that continues to give us Adventure Time can't be completely horrible. Or at least that's what I'm going to tell myself so I don't have to go outside. Anyways, what were your favorite cartoons of 2023? Are there any other great shows from that year that I missed? Do you still feel cheated that I didn't rant about Velma? Feel free to discuss in the comments below if you like. Maybe even consider subscribing if you want to hear more of me rambling on about cartoons. Seriously, I really would appreciate the support, because unless this video does okay, I'm not sure if I'll be able to find it in me to do another project like this. Or maybe I'll still do videos like this anyway. Who knows? Either way, this list has left me very tired and I would like to go to bed now. So here's to 2023, a year that brought us so much great animation in spite of the industry's nonsense and the world inching ever closer to total societal collapse. I just want you all to remember the great stuff that came out that year, because once that animation strike starts, we are going to get so much bullshit. Remember kids, Mickey Mouse says unionize.